Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. The premise of our educational system is to provide support for all students to succeed and become college ready. At least this is true in theory. In practice, this support seems to be geared towards general education students, leaving the special education students out of the equation, kind of creating a system of haves and have-nots. Of course, this is not true in every school or every school district, but the needs of special education students must be met with the same fervor as with general education students if we are to truly level the playing field. To help us understand some of the issues that hinder the development and perception of special education students, today we welcome to the classroom Ms. Danielle N. Williams, founder and CEO of S.T.I.G.M.A Consulting Groups, a company predicated on dispelling the stigma that parents and students with disabilities face every day. Currently serving as secretary for the New York State Commissioner's Advisory Panel on Special Education, Ms. Williams has been a special educator for over 15 years and has over 12 years of legal experience in which she advocates for parents and students with disabilities to receive all rights designated to them under IDEA. Please welcome Ms. Danielle Williams to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. This is Dr. Williams.
And I'm glad that you're able to revisit our classroom.
Yes,
we had a conversation a little while ago regarding special education, but I think it's always something that we need to keep in the forefront when we talking about education anyway, especially this time of year. We think that this time of year we're talking about annual reviews for IEPs and things of that nature. So what should parents and caregivers do besides showing up to the annual review in order to ensure that their students get all that they're supposed to? Right.
So as a parent of two children who have IEPs, for me, one of the things that I always tell my parents, and I will tell everyone, is the IEP is a consistent living document. So what does that mean? Read it and put it in a place that is on your refrigerator, which is a place everybody goes to, instead of in a drawer where sometimes you forget, right? So my process, my son's IEP, my youngest son's IEP is coming up May 7th. My oldest would be in June. And then from those times we've had the IEP from last year, I've looked at it every other month, to be honest with you. Now we know, just like you said, it's testing season. April 19th through the 21st is the ELA state exam for 3 to 8th grade. And math is May 2nd through the 5th. Then we go to Regents in June. Yep. And so before that, one of the things I've always done is just started talking to my teachers when they have their first quarterly report. How are they doing? What does it look like towards what my children can do successfully on the exam? When I talk to my children about the exam or we review for the exam, it's really about what is the strategy that you're going to take. I am not a proponent of all state exams give the best indication of a student's greatness or their academic ability. I am an advocate of it is a really good judgment for parents to understand where your children, especially students with disabilities, have their weaknesses.
Right.
So that we're using that state exam and that data to understand what we need to do in terms of that IEP. So
the state exam. So basically, what you're saying, the state exam can be used by the parents and caregivers as kind of like a diagnostic tool.
100%.
Okay.
And you use it for your tutors.
Yeah.
I have tutors for my son. You use it in the classroom. I see they got these questions wrong. He's weak in an essay, or he's better at multiple choice. That gives you help, because that's what it's going to look like when my children are going towards Regents. So it's always developmental. One of the things I tell parents all the time, Kevin, is review your IEP, review the testing modifications. You should have had conversations with your testing accommodations in January. So, for example, this year, students are able to do either a computer-based exam. That alone is a different additional process.
Yes.
When we used to have it on paper, your head goes down, you start reading the directions, you start doing the test. Now, I have to look at a screen, use my scrap paper, write those notes, then go. So I just added another step. It takes practice to get this correctly. So for me, I said that for my youngest who's taking tests this year, let him just do, for the Regents, the paper test. But when he's doing his iReady assessment or other assessments, let him do that on the computer. So he's getting the practice of knowing what it feels like to be on the computer taking a test, because it's a different feel, it's a different look. You're typing on a keyboard, which is a whole nother conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Typing on the keyboard, all those things. You should also look at those testing accommodations by January and say, does my child really need them? Because testing accommodations is not just a blanket slate. I need double time, time and a half, special seating this. Those are very general. Special seating means they need to sit in the front of the room or on the left side because they're a left-handed student like me who needs to sit in the left in the corner so it doesn't look I'm turning to the right and cheating. Be very specific about that. Also be very specific about, does your child really need the double time? Do they need really time and a half for one test? Like my son uses time and a half for math, but he needs double time for English because that's his weaker area. Doesn't mean he uses all the time. He needs all the time. What does it mean for prompting? A tap on the shoulder is a prompt, but also just a look in your face and say, you good? Okay, that's another prompt. So you want to be very detailed. January, I always recommend, is the time that you look at your IEPs and say, is this still on track? You can easily text or email your teachers and say, hey, these are their testing accommodations. Even though IEP may not be coming up in May and June, do you think these still are good for my child so that this is all set up for the testing?
Now, you mentioned something about the timing and giving extra time for exams. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the state exams now untimed anyway?
They are, but you still on the IEP have to write time and a half, double time. You're not, because your child is under IDEA, they still get that accommodation, and you still write those on the IEPs. Yes, they're untimed, but still you want to make sure, because the test can be still given for 3 hours, depending on what the school is doing. If that child has double time, they have the rest of the time. And also helps for planning for when you have your proctors and people who are going to work, because I have been a proctor when a child had double time for Regents. I was there from 12 to 7:30 in the evening. Child did well. Child needed the time. So I had to make sure I was regulated when I'm proctoring and doing that with the child so they get exactly what they need. But the untimed, kids sometimes don't use untimed. They see their friends leaving and they're rushing out. No, you want to work with your child and say, take your time. This is not their test. It's your test. So take your time and take your breaks for what you need.
And I think that's a good thing to think about even for your general ed students, because like you said, all kids, they look around and they say, oh, well, this person is leaving, so I need to hurry up and finish. And that's when mistakes happen. So it's about your test. You take your time to finish your test, and who cares if everybody else in the room leaves? Sometimes
I've recommended that a student, they face their chair to a blank wall so they don't see what's around them. It's not a punishment. It just allows them to focus. Allowing students to use earplugs, not their earplugs for their phone, but just plugs in their ears so they don't hear the noise. I've also asked people to use blinders for my children. Blinders are literally a manila envelope cut into two squares and putting it in front. It's not a big deal, but it helps to keep them focused on what they do. And if you see a lot of kids getting up, that's usually when I tell the teachers all the time, let the students who are staying longer, give them a 5-minute break. Let them do it so you can collect and all that rustling is gone. They get all that out and then they can sit back down and continue to work.
Now, those particular strategies you just mentioned, using the blinders or even using the earplugs and everything, would that be considered like an accommodation that would have to be listed on the IEP, or is that something that can just be done the day of?
I would list it on the IEP. Yes, all schools are different. You want to be specific. If you say I need a quiet space, you could put in parentheses, earplugs used if needed. Student has them right there. They're $1. Blinders if needed, so that when they're in a quiet place, they need a blinder. That is blank. Be very specific. There's no writing on it, anything, because you don't want the accusations of cheating, but something that blocks their face so that they can't see. anything that you need to be specific on the IEP so that it's given to you by your district. That's something that's real important. A lot of schools know what to do. I mean, for example, one of the things that people don't realize is that you can use highlighters on the state exam. No one ever talks about that. You can use highlighters. Yeah. And they said, really? I said, yes. Child, just give them a highlighter. They're allowed to mark all over exam. There are no rules in that. As long as that Scantron's filled out, as long as the essays person filled out, they can write on the side and take their notes. All those things are utilized for the state exam so that they can be the most successful.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that it is a particular skill that a lot of people tend to forget, or they think that is cheating because they're highlighting, they're marking up the book. But no, the booklet itself says you can mark it up as much as you want to.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's definitely. But I want to go back really quickly to what you were talking about as far as the use of computers and how now we've done a lot of computer-based testing. Yeah. And what does that really mean for the special needs student? Because like you mentioned, there's an additional step or two now that they have to incorporate into their entire thought process. So walk us through, how does that special needs child kind of process all of these extra steps to try to come up with a comprehensive answer when they're putting their exams together?
So it's very similar to when a special needs student has to copy notes from a board to their notebook. You have to look up, you look down, you write all that's going in the brain waves to get that on the paper. When I was a teacher, I would give my students a 10-minute timer. They looked at me like I was crazy and said, there's no way I'm getting this down because I have OT and I write slow. And it took a while for this to happen. But halfway in the year, 10 minutes they were in, and then we were ready to rock and roll. It's the same thing with looking at a computer. We have our students looking at the computer, but our students are not looking at the computer all day long. We can use this as an example for COVID. Remember when COVID occurred and we were shut down, and all of a sudden teachers had to then teach from a computer. That's not what they went to school for.
Right.
They went to school to teach on a board, and so they had to learn how to be able to navigate that computer, do a Zoom, control the chat, have the lesson on the board, be able to write on their screen, and get students to be completely engrossed in their lesson. Of course, that was one of the most difficult things.
Of course.
So all the teachers and administrators, you remember that experience. Trust me, I remember that experience. Take that experience and now think about, we're now moving to taking computer taste tests. Remember how long it took us to get it all together with Zoom? Guess what? Our students with disabilities are going to take as long. Not even students with disabilities. Students are going to take a while. So we can let go of the students with disabilities. We can just say children are going to have a while. So what I always tell administrators and teachers is don't forget the experience we had. Our students are going to have the same experience. So as a child is preparing to transition from written to typing on a computer, first thing we haven't addressed. Does everybody know how to word process? When you and I went to school, we took typing. I know we did. They don't do that anymore. No. The difference of the typewriter and a keyboard and a laptop feels differently. If you have a student who's kinesthetic, that feel of the typing on the board makes it look differently. Some students need an accommodation where they put the shield on top of the keyboard. Some students don't. So if they don't know how to type and they're using their two fingers, how long do you think it's going to take them to do that essay? So they have to literally learn, and they may need scrap paper on the end, this is true, but they need to be able to read on the screen, which also, are they wearing their glasses? Are they far away from, are they back close to it from the screen? Does the screen need to be darkened? Does there need to be a shield? All those things start coming into play.
Yep.
Then they have to read the question, process the question. Then they may need to take a note because our students may need to take notes, which is fine. Then they have to type the answer. You know how many steps that is?
That's a lot.
That's a lot
That's
of
a lot
steps.
to process, yes.
And so it's a lot of processing. And our students, regardless of them looking at their phones for instant gratification, you're now having to change that into you producing a document or an essay or an answer that is going to give you the points you need on that state exam.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Secretary for the New York State Commissioner's Advisory Panel for Special Education and founder and CEO of S.T.I.G.M.A Consulting Group, Dr. Danielle Williams. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit because I understand that you have recently been invited to present at the ASCD National Conference.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you talked about and if you can provide our listeners with any other tips or strategies that they might be able to use to ensure that their students' academic, social, and emotional success.
So I did a presentation with ASCD. And I did a proposal based on an article that I published last year, titled "It's Not a Death Sentence, The Other Side of the Gift, My Journey in Special Education with My Sons, who are now 14 and 11 respectively." I took that proposal and I wanted to do something on special education for academic, social, and emotional success. We know that the big buzzwords now are SEL. What are we doing for our students' emotionals based on what happened with the pandemic? But also we have to get them academically ready if they choose to go to college or trade school or an internship or apprenticeship. So I did this presentation really talking about the journey because I think that for me, as I share my story, it allows people to understand really where we are in the journey of special education. We delve into the 13 classifications, and I presented to teachers, superintendents, district leaders, and I really didn't have to go through the 13 classifications of IDEA. What I did do, however, was really talk about what does it mean when you see that IEP and that says on the child's IEP autism? What do you really think? And then we talked about strategies. The strategies to me were the most important: virtual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So, for example, virtual strategies. Create a PowerPoint, have your students create the PowerPoint, have them use a Prezi, and let them create as many visuals as possible. Another strategy, students like to use their phones or touch them. Some would say, oh my gosh, the student is touching their phone and they won't turn their phones down. An easy way to knock that out, on your tables in your classrooms, cut out the largest size kind of phone there is, put a tape around it, and tell the students, just put your phone flat. We're going to use it in a second. Do a do now, do an aim, a learning target. Have them research something, show the phone. Teacher can walk around the room, see exactly what the students are using and what they've researched, and then they can put it down. They've already got their technology fix, let's say, to use the phone, and they're keeping it moving. Auditory, sound and pitches, using bass, not using bass, using the treble. How it works, what you have on is headphone sets. Some students need headphone sets.
Yeah.
You can provide that in their room. So I did auditory, I did kinesthetic. Those strategies really help in terms of what you want to do, but you also can take these strategies and use them at home. For example, my sons need very strict, not strict, but structured days. So Saturday is more their free day, right? I give them an index card. It's very simple. I just write down the things they have to do today. They take the index card. They put it in their pocket. They check it off. When they're done, they're free. It provides structure in my household. It provides them a schedule. It provides them an agenda. Visual learners love agendas. They love color codes. They love to check everything off. They love to organize your whole room or your classroom or your school. Auditory learners want to use different technology to help them with that in using words and phrases. One of the simplest things you can do for anyone is when you are showing anything on the screen, a video, a PowerPoint, a Prezi, just use closed captions. I've said this before millions of times. Press the closed caption button. You do it when you're watching TV at home. Do it now. You'd be surprised how you get your entire audience completely engrossed in what you're saying because they're looking at that visual or they're hearing it in their ear, which is really great. Also, sometimes providing little knickknacks are really easy, like having a pen here, which I can twirl, or using a squeezy ball or something like that that they can use. And the last thing I've learned is we as educators sometimes need to change the way we think rote education is. So I had a student, I was talking about him, Jeffrey, who taught me absolutely how to be a better educator. He could not sit down. He would sit, sometimes with his feet planted, sometimes with his feet crossed, have his knees back. He couldn't sit down. I couldn't figure out what was happening. I was like, why wouldn't he sit rote? Wasn't happening. He looked at me and said, I just need to move. You have students in your classroom who just need to move.
Yeah.
So instead I said, well, what did you need? He said, just give me a clipboard and let me just take notes in the back standing. Of course, as an educator, I was like, are you crazy? And I was like, this is not going to work. I'm not going to be able to handle it. It was me. You know so I said? I'm not going to be able to handle this because I'm in front of the board. He did it, and he would walk back, kind of pace, had a clipboard. When he was done, he sat back down. He would sit down for 10 minutes, and I was able to look at the data, meaning I was timing him, how long he could sit down and where we could extend. Totally different child, no behavior issues, was out of my class by the end of the year in an ICT in general ed, like that. Why? Because I accommodated him. I, though, as the educator, had to get over myself. My students are not sitting in rows with their hands folded. That's not happening. They want to talk and they want to move. And if they are kinesthetic type of learners, they're moving with their hands and they're talking, that's fine. If they think it's distracting, okay, how can I help you so that when you're moving, you're not distracting, but people are paying attention to your words, not just your movements.
And it's amazing that you say that as educators, we really need to get over ourselves and pay more attention to what our students need. Yeah. Because when you go out into the workforce, that's exactly how people operate at work. Right. I don't know anybody who's sitting down at their desk just sitting straight and everything. Everybody's moving. They're walking around. They're chatting with each other. They have their own headphones on. They're in their own little spaces, and they're still being productive. Yep. So where did they get that from? Obviously, they didn't learn that in school where the teachers telling them to sit still in their chairs. Right. So if they do this naturally when they get older, why not use that to the teacher's advantage now? So that they really know how to express themselves and get that and fine tune those strategies for themselves. Absolutely. So that when they get to the workforce, it becomes second nature and is no problem.
And I think that I've used the wheel before, the visual auditory. I've done different surveys with my students. And in the beginning of the year, even at my school right now, because I'm principal of a small high school Twilight alternative program in Valley Stream. And the first thing I did was visual, auditory, kinesthetic, had a little 10 questionnaire, and I figured out my students who they were, and I gave it to the teachers and said, this student's going to move, this student's going to twirl, this student's going to want to listen carefully, this student may need one pod in their ear. It doesn't mean that they're listening to music. That's a safety mechanism, right? That they need this, and if they need to ask for help there. I think that as we work with the students, educators like myself always have to ask those pre-questions. September is a wonderful time to get to know your students, to create that classroom environment. So when you are going throughout the year and you're pushing them in that content which they need, you know how to adapt to them so that they can get exactly what they need, academically, socially, emotionally. Also, it curves, honestly, behavior problems. Yeah. When a student feels like they can come into your classroom and be themselves, they will do anything for you, even when it is challenging. I don't understand. It's a wonderful word that children say. I don't understand. That means they trust you enough to admit they don't understand, but they're asking you, can you help me? Can you teach me so I can be better? And I always tell people all the time, the process is more significant sometimes than the answer.
So let's shift gears one more time, sure, and kind of bring it to the forefront as far as the stuff that's happening today, because we know that like adaptive technologies have always been around, and students have been able to take advantage of that. But now with artificial intelligence being developed more and is becoming more expansive, how will that kind of impact how our special needs students operate? Is that something that's going to be more of a help to them or more of a hindrance as far as their academic development?
So it depends on how it's used, right? You got ChatGPT. It's great. It's an editor. It can write a paper for you. It can do all those great things. But at the end of the day, you're still taking the English Regents. And you have to write the English Regents. That adaptation is not going to be there. So I say it's both. Okay. It's how do you use it? As I was just having a conversation with my colleague, Dr. Erdos, about how you can use this, not even for students with disabilities, just in general with students. How is it used? Kind of like use Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia is not the only thing in terms of research. You got to know how to research. Same thing with this, with AI. It can be used to help students with disabilities to edit their work. It could also be used to, like we're doing now, we're having a conversation and writing down and transcripting. But you still need to learn the correction of grammar, syntax. You still need to learn if it's spelled correctly. So you can use it as an assistant. I always say the AI is like a vitamin. We take vitamins as a +1, right? It's not our base when we're eating food, our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and our 2 snacks. Vitamins are a +1 to give us a little extra nutrients. Same thing with this. It can be misused, right? Mm-hmm. We know there are going to be educators that say this is used for cheating. But at the end of the day, if you utilize it and say this is an extra tool for especially students with disabilities to be able to write with students who couldn't write at all, and it teaches them, okay, I want to write a paper on the first battle of World War I. It does the paper for you, but then it goes back and you can use it and say, wait a minute, well, I did this research and I learned this from my teacher. And then you can use it as a tool. Mm-hmm. Where it becomes misused is that it's used as a replacement.
Right.
The state exams have not said that we are allowed to use those, right? No. You still have to sit there and write that essay for that English Regents and Associates Regents. And so that is how you can misuse it, and you don't want to, but you want to use it to enhance the work you're doing.
And I think the other part of it that a lot of teachers are trying to get, the point they're trying to get across is when you use these things, it doesn't create your own voice. And so we want students to find and express their own voices. Right. So when yes, even writing has a voice.
Right.
So when you're writing these essays and it's just completely computer generated, then it doesn't say what you put into it.
So how are you going to write an argumentative essay?
Right.
You have to write an argumentative essay on the Regents. You have to give the pros and the cons. That's not going to be done. It's just going to give you the facts. Mm-hmm. You still have to go back and do the pros and the cons. And then at that last paragraph or two, tell me what decision you've decided to make and defend it. So there's limitations to that as well.
So if you had one final, I guess, tip to give parents, caregivers, and schools about how to really kind of level that playing field to remove that stigma, as your company says, from special education, what would that be?
Open your mind to the possibilities of all your children. I always say, for my sons, no one can take their greatness away. No one. I am responsible for tapping into their greatness. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it's easy. But it is your responsibility to dig deep. So for administrators like myself, learn your students as best you can and see what they can do. Highlight the strengths, work on the weaknesses. Parents, don't just come in at the IEP meeting once a year and say, what are we doing next year? My challenge to you is, what are you doing next year? What are we doing next year? Using that IEP, not only just in school, but in daily life at home. When I go away on vacation, I know the things that I need for my sons. I do that when they go to camp. I do that when if they choose to go to summer school. I use the IEP as a living, breathing document all the time to really help our children.
I think those are some really great tips and strategies that all of us can use, and not just for our special needs children, but for all of our students and around, because we all have the same type of needs and desires going forward. But we would definitely like to thank our guest today, Secretary for the New York State Commissioners Advisory Panel for Special Education and founder and CEO of S.T.I.G.M.A Consulting Group and personal friend of mine, Dr. Danielle Williams, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.